Hey everyone, welcome to the podcast. Eating well and working out will only get us so far in our health journey. Today's podcast is about discovering the hidden factors that really make a difference in our well-being. Studies show that we are one of the richest nations. We are also one of the unhealthiest, and it has very little to do with our doctor's visits. In this episode, you will hear from Dr. Kelli Harding. She is an assistant clinical professor of psychiatry at Columbia University. She has spent her career looking at the inconsistencies of medicine, things like why some people feel side effects of medicine when they're actually on a placebo, or why two people with the same diagnosis have drastically different outcomes. Or even this, why couples seem to pass away within months of each other. She's the author of the critically acclaimed book, The Rabbit Effect, Live Longer, Happier, and Healthier with the Groundbreaking Science of Kindness. I was drawn to her research because it's not about eating well or moving to a blue zone and adapting a Mediterranean diet. It's about love, friendship, community, environment, and kindness. Here now is Dr. Kelli Harding with 6 keys to making us healthier.
Stand by. We're going live. We're going live. 10, 9, going live. 7, 6, 5, going live. 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello, and thank you for taking the time today. I have to say, thank you for the research. I honestly, while I was reading your book, I was screenshotting different pages and sending them over to my husband. So I love when that happens, right? And I learn just, all kinds of little things. So thank you for that.
Oh, that makes me so happy to hear that. Thank you for saying that. And also thank you for the kindness of your podcast. It's really extraordinary. I've really enjoyed listening to the different episodes, and I feel like it's a life class in how to engage with the world and ourselves. It's wonderful.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Well, you are talking about some things that sound obvious, but then some that really don't sound obvious. So what goes through your mind, 10 seconds to air before you have to communicate about this?
So I'm a medical doctor that specializes in mental health in part. And so the thing that always goes through my mind before every single podcast or talk is that there's probably someone listening that really needs to hear this. And just to let them know right off the bat, you are not alone. There are lots of good supports and resources out there, and just know that you matter. I've had the great privilege of hearing lots of people's stories about how tiny acts of kindness have entirely saved their lives. So just never underestimate what's available out there and how your actions make a real difference.
Mm-hmm. So you came to medicine out of psychiatry, right?
Well, so psychiatry is a residency that comes after 4 years after college and 4 years of med school. And for me, actually, I was really interested in the mind-body connection. So I first studied adult internal medicine and then psychiatry. And then it at the end of it all kind of led me to rabbits and sort of thinking about the big picture of health and really like what makes us healthy in our lives.
Right. What makes us healthy in our lives. And a lot of people think it's going to the doctor. And you say that's not a big percentage. It's actually very little percentage of what makes us healthy.
Well, I have to say, as a medical doctor, that was some hard news to stomach when I first read that. It's like, we've done all this work and what?
Right.
But actually, it is really shocking, as critical as medical care is to our health and well-being, and absolutely everybody needs access to high quality, good medical care. It probably only accounts for, it's estimated, about 10 to 20% of our overall health status, which leaves a big question, like what else are we missing when it comes to our health and well-being?
Yeah.
And that's sort of been the focus of my career.
Right. So 10 to 20%. So that leaves us like a lot of wiggle room. We've got this 80% to fill in that we actually have some power over when it comes to our wellness and our health. You have studied that. You found some I'm not going to say, well, let's call them inconsistencies, right? Some inconsistencies in medicine early in your career that you said, hey, wait a second, two people diagnosed with the same illness have different outcomes. Why is that?
Yeah, and sort of the medical mysteries is what intrigued me and still intrigues me and makes medicine an infinitely interesting career for people that are in healthcare listening. And or thinking about it as a career. And yeah, that's exactly it. Is I was just really struck. You'd see patients with, that would really defy diagnoses, that were told they didn't have much longer to live, and then they would just continue onwards. There was one patient I write about in the book that continued to live on past their physician. So, people are always full of surprises. And then the opposite of that, which we see a lot, I worked for a long time in the emergency room, is, people who come in with like really debilitating pain or other symptoms that are preventing them from living full lives or disruptive to their lives. And yet by our current testing, we can't quite figure out what's going on. And, that's really frustrating when you feel like your life has been derailed by symptoms, but you can't get a clear answer what's happening. So, so that also led me to this whole area of research and study, trying to figure out what's going on there too.
Yeah, well, it is fascinating. You also talk about, I know, why it happens that couples will pass away within sometimes months of each other, or why someone may be in a testing and they get that placebo effect. They think they have symptoms or side effects that they really just shouldn't have, or they get benefits from the placebo and there's nothing there for them to be receiving a benefit from. So where does this all come from? What have you found?
Sure. So, so when you kind of peel back well, first, I just want to take a second to be like, just to acknowledge that there are so many fascinating mysteries that we still don't have a great handle on, but some understanding in terms of sort of the mind-body connection. And you mentioned the placebo effect. Our mind is infinitely powerful when it comes to our health, and it's often underestimated and not really thought about as part of the full connection. Although I feel like we're light years from where we were even 10 years ago thinking about that. And so I just want to say, like, it is infinitely fascinating. And then the other big piece of it that we've really been missing is thinking about our social health. And so thinking about how our relationship with the world, and that's the relationships that are happening in our homes, our workplaces, our schools, our neighborhoods, our broader communities and society, is really impacting our physical health. And, the striking thing is, you mentioned that statistic that people are at a higher risk of mortality in the 6 months following their partner passing away, which, doesn't biologically, how does that work? That doesn't make sense, right? They're separate entities and separate individuals, but in fact, we're connected through our social world as well. So, and also just sort of pausing there, it's important too, if you know someone who's lost a partner, just make sure that you continue to provide that support because they are at higher risk. And so this is the thing. It turns out our social world is getting under our skin, per se. And it's unbelievable because it's happening all around us all day, all the time. And when you look at the data, it is just so clear and crystal cut that how we are treated in our everyday lives really matters to our health and well-being, and not just our mental health, but our physical health as well. And that is just this absolutely revolutionary idea that I know when I started medicine is not how I thought about how physiology works, but it's something we have to pay attention to. And the most exciting part is, for those listening, is we absolutely play a role in this. It means that we have some opportunity to change this for ourselves and our loved ones and for the people around us. On every single day, we have a lot of opportunities to make things better. And that's really empowering.
It is. It sure is. So let's lay out kind of what the components are, and then we can dive into each one of them.
Sure.
So you have a list of components that are on page 12,
All right? Yeah, I gotta grab
in
it.
this book. But let's list them for people who don't have the book in front of them. Let's list some of the components. I know there are categories: love, community, all of that. But go ahead, and then we'll dive into them.
Sure. And for people who are watching this on YouTube, it's this circle diagram, and you are right in the center. And then for people who are just listening, I'll just sort of describe it. You can sort of imagine yourself at the center of this universe, which we all tend to think we are anyhow. And then from there, you can sort of like the layers of an onion kind of peeling out, thinking about our connection and relationships around us. So truly starting in the home. So, whether you live alone, whether you have a pet, whether you have a partner, kids, a roommate, all of those things, how you're interacting and feeling at home really matters to your health, it turns out. Everything from if you're comfortable giving someone a hug on their way out the door, like what kind of mood you start in, it's got this ripple effect on your day, and it turns out this ripple effect on your health. And then as you move out, we're looking at the love and kindness that you're experiencing on a day-to-day basis in all these different areas. So, the next level is sort of your relationships beyond the home, your friendships. And you've probably seen it's so exciting because the research really is built up over decades, showing that our connections our positive social connections are our friendships or relationships. Sometimes they're family members too, or pets, are the biggest predictor of our health. And that's not at all what people were expecting. A great example of that is actually, there's been a study that's been going on at Harvard for, I think it's on like 86 years, currently led by Dr. Waldinger, who, it's been a surprising finding. They started out the study decades ago trying to look at what were the factors that help people live healthy lives. And they were expecting things like cholesterol and heart disease. And it turns out, like, when you sort of look at it, it's actually like the biggest predictor of people's health in their 80s is their relationship in their healthy relationships in their 50s, which is mysterious and also exciting because that's something we can actually invest in. And we just hadn't thought of it as part of how we care for our health.
Wow. So pause on that for just 1 second. So your health in your 80s, they're looking at, and it has a significant correlation to your relationships when you were in your 50s?
Yeah. And actually, that's not the only study. There are studies, these longitudinal studies that are extraordinarily done with tons of data points because they're prospective, meaning they're looking forward and trying to figure out what are the factors that are going to help contribute to a healthy, happy life. And it is really striking because relationships are the common theme, and not just any relationships, but kind, positive relationships. Relationships where you feel like someone's got your back, you're supported. If you're having a hard day, you've got somebody to talk to. Like, those are the kinds of relationships we're looking at. So, there was a time probably in the 70s where we thought it was kind of radical to think like, your diet affects your health. Like, who would have thought? Mm-hmm, and it's like, we're kind of going through that revolution now with our social connections. It's like, oh my goodness, this is like a huge part of our health. So, we didn't think about like, calling friends or meeting up with loved ones or even going to like brunch, like things that seem kind of silly, or talking to your neighbors or even talking to the person at the grocery store. Like, it turns out all of those things are beneficial for our health.
Right. And for people who say, well, wait a second, okay, yeah, I talked to my neighbor or whatever, but is it really helping my health? Or like, how can we measure that?
Yeah.
Tell us about the rabbit effect, because that's very interesting. And there are other studies too that you talk about. We'll talk about that one, and then the one with the mice and the licking and I thought these were some really interesting studies. So for the skeptic who's listening, who's like, yeah, really, but will it help my cholesterol? Yeah, it just might.
Yeah. And that's what's so wild, right? Because we all have human bodies. They're all, at some point we all pass away, and we're prone to diseases and other breakdowns. But the thing is, how can we expand health span, and how can we help people live longer and healthier, even with the diseases that they develop? And it turns out that that loving kindness, those supportive relationships, have both direct and indirect effects. And what I mean by that is, direct effects are you've got somebody to take you to the doctor or look after you if you've broken your leg or injured yourself in some capacity. And then the sort of indirect effects, which are actually measured more through our stress hormones and our our response to the everyday social stresses. It's sort of like death by 1,000 paper cuts or something, because you're constantly getting barraged with this. But what's extraordinary is it shows that even when you do develop illnesses, you tend to do better, heal faster when you've got that support. There are these amazing studies that I talk about in the book where it's like people heal faster from wounds if they have supportive relationships around them, if they you feel less pain if you're holding the hand of someone that you have a good relationship with. It turns out holding the hand of someone you don't have a great relationship with doesn't matter. But those moments, and you can kind of, for those listening, you can kind of just think about it, right? Like, think of a moment where you were struggling and somebody showed up and just like had your back, and maybe they just showed you a little love and kindness. Like, I was just thinking of a neighbor who dropped off something nice, and it's like, my goodness, it's like you just in your body feel that relaxing happening, and that's actually having this cascade of physiological effects that we know are beneficial. And what's just so exciting is it's like study after study just confirms that.
Right. So it's hard to measure, though. And again, for a skeptic, I want you to, I can kind of explain the rabbit effect, but I'd love for you to do it
study.
So that I don't screw it up.
Sure. I'm happy to tell.
Yeah, the rabbit study.
Sure. So one of the, which the book, The Rabbit Effect, got named after, but so one of the studies that was really at the forefront of looking at this and was, picture yourself like it's back in the 1970s. We don't totally know if your diet impacts your heart health. So there were a ton of studies being done looking at if high-fat diets affected cholesterol and presumably things like risk of stroke, heart attack, all that. So there was a professor by the name of Dr. Robert Neeram, who's just an absolutely lovely person, who was doing a study among genetically identical rabbits, giving them all a high-fat diet, expecting the same health outcome. And what ended up happening is in his lab in the late 1970s, he discovered that one group of rabbits had vastly different health outcomes than the others, like a 60% difference. And this is actually looking under the microscope at their arteries and everything. And what he discovered, he thought, first of all, he'd done something wrong, that the lab had somehow flubbed the study. But when they looked back, everything checked out. And then what happened was extraordinary. They looked up and realized that all of the rabbits that had the better health outcomes were cared for by one researcher in particular, a woman named Marina Levesque, who actually picked up the rabbits. She would pet the rabbits. She was giving them, love and kindness and warmth and all those good things. And Dr. Neeram and his team thought, could it be that somehow the social world is impacting the biology of these rabbits? And he thought, well, if this is the case, well, first he said, I'm a basic scientist. This is not my area, but if this is true, this is just totally changes how we think about biology, and it turns everything on its head. So they went ahead, redid the experiment, got the exact same results, and they published it in the journal Science, that indeed love and kindness actually had changed biology. And, fast forward now, we have decades and decades of very well done research that shows that exact same phenomenon. And it's almost to the point where it's ridiculous. Like, this is so well known, and we've now actually known it for some time. But then you sort of look around at our world and we're not really treating each other very kindly a lot of the time. And I think that's where I've really been on a mission to try to let people know, like, these things really matter. It's not enough to just sort of like go to the gym and eat healthy and see your doctor. Like, we have to be paying attention to our social world, and it's not just for our benefit, but for our benefit of the people we love as well.
Right. Well, it's true. It makes me think of, there are times, right, where you have conflict, let's say, or relationships that maybe are not the healthiest, and you don't know. But if you do sort of a gut check, if you do have a relationship or a conversation that sort of is repeated and you're like, that doesn't really make me feel very good. If you do take the time to think about what makes you feel good, maybe we would make better decisions on our health. Or if we knew, wow, that doesn't make me feel good, actually, that hurts my health. I don't think of it like that.
Yeah.
If I have an interaction that isn't so good and I continue to do that, and then I recognize that that's not good for my health, that's a big thing. I think most of us don't think like that. We don't think that we continue to have a relationship, let's say, with a family member that is not very healthy, and you continue to have those relationships. They're simply not healthy. And they actually hurt our health. Whereas if you have, like you're saying, a good relationship, it goes the other way. If you have something that really, it does make you feel good. What is it? What is that piece? Is it the oxytocin? Like, what's happening chemically that really is helping us and helping our well-being and our health?
So when you look at sort of like what's happening physiologically with these relationships is, oxytocin is one of the neurotransmitters involved, but it really has to do with the hypothalamic pituitary axis or HPA axis, and sort of thinking about cortisol levels. And what's really interesting is, and actually the fellow who, and I talk about him in the book, has an extraordinary story of how we figured out the human stress response. Like, he kept sort of giving different stressors and getting the same response. And he was totally upset because he thought, what's happening here? But it turns out it doesn't matter if we're like being chased by a lion or seeing a snake, or we have a really difficult boss. Like it turns out we have like the same biological reaction to this. And in the short term, it's great. It gets us to mobilize, take action, get the resources we need to, run away or do what we need to fight it off, whatever we need to do. But the challenges in our modern everyday lives, it's just like constant stressors to the point where, and I know some of your other guests have talked about this, it's like we're living in this state of hyper stress that we forget we can actually relax and unplug and calm down from that. And that's really needed for our bodies, that, we were not meant to be on 24/7 or, are in front of lights 24/7, like we often are with our screens now, it feels like. So that's what's sort of happening physiologically. The big piece of this, though, that I would say is almost like the mindset and the willpower to notice these things. Because it's sort of like, we're so immersed in our social world that we don't even, like a fish in water, right? Like, we don't even notice that that we're in a situation that's not great sometimes till we take those breaks. Or like, I know a lot of your guests have recommended things like meditation. Like, when you kind of pause, you can kind of actually feel in your body, like, what's healthy, what's working, what's not. And I would also say, another piece of this is relationships and conflicts are not static. Like, we can give ourselves the skills to learn how to navigate conflicts kindly. And that's actually something that's ended up becoming a big focus of this, because relationships are just inevitably stressful, and we're put in situations that, there's lots of challenges with. I know some of your other guests have spoken about that. And how do we pay attention to our feelings and needs in a way that's still kind and respectful of someone else, that still treats them with dignity even when we don't agree? Those are big, hard questions that nobody teaches you in school. You kind of have to learn. And I'm so glad that you've got this podcast, because you can actually learn these skills by listening to some of your wonderful guests.
Thank you. You included. You're now part of that. There were some other studies that you have mentioned that I thought were fascinating. I mean, one of them was the licking of was it the rats?
Oh, yes.
Or the affection?
Yeah.
What was that?
So this is Dr. Chef's work at McGill, who's an extraordinary researcher. And I talk about his aha moment in the book with this research. So what's so amazing is, we used to think that like your genes were your destiny, right? And so there was sort of this idea, I think even in parenting for a long time, it was kind of like, like your kids will be who they are, like they're just genetically programmed to be that way. And then these licking rat studies came along. So basically the study goes like this, like there were lab assistants who noticed that they were sitting in the lab, and there's certain rats that will just like bite you the minute that you put your hand in the cage, that are sort of like hyper alert, aggressive. And they noticed that those were the rats that were often tended to by parents of rats that were like that. So, okay, that makes sense. Like it's genetically getting passed on, this personality trait. But then what they discovered, apparently rats will happily adopt other rat pups. And what they found is that if the sort of more docile rats adopted a pup that was from a more aggressive rat, that pup would actually go on to be a more docile rat as well. So then that kind of raises this nurture nature question, right? Like what's exactly happening here? And this is the most extraordinary part. It turns out that what they found is that when you sort of do these rat pup swaps, that it actually is impacting the DNA, but on a way they never imagined, involving these little bits of protein called histones, that it's how the DNA folds. And so it's not changing the DNA itself, it's changing the sort of story of the DNA. It's like you could think of it as being edited. So this is what we now call the field of epigenetics. And he was really at the forefront of figuring out that our social world is actually turning on and off genes. And you could probably think of this in your own lives, just for those listening, of, there's not what we would call perfect concordance of illnesses. Like, you can have identical twins. One twin develops an illness, the other doesn't. What's happened there? Or you can have, things like actually a diagnosis of schizophrenia is a good example, where it's not a perfect, it's not clear who goes on to get the illness and who doesn't, even if there's a high family risk. And so it turns out things like epigenetics really matter. And one of the key things that is turning on and off epigenetics is, of course, adverse childhood experiences, which can sort of change that over the lifetime. And so that's why, there's all these interesting studies about how childhood events impact our long-term health as well, and what we can do to address that once we realize it.
Yeah. So what can we do to address that? Because if we're all trying to get to this well-being, we all may start off in a different place, right? And we have different impacts that impact or different events that impact our epigenetics. So how can we take maybe our past or our particular situation and make a turn there?
Yeah. So one of the ways that we've talked about, and I feel like has become a big area since the pandemic, is post-traumatic growth. So it's this idea that, well, first of all, literally every other person you pass on the street has had something in their background that has happened to them that you would be considered what we now call an ACE, or an adverse childhood experience. And you can Google that term and see what they are online. And the idea is that, we are not defined by what happens to us, but we can choose to think about that story and how we address it. And, we can't change the past, but we can change our reaction to it and learn to grow from these experiences, even though we would have never wished them on ourselves or other people. So there's a lot of work that's been done on this. And that's one area that I think is pretty extraordinary. But even just being aware of it, it used to be the kind of thing your doctor would never talk to you about. Now, a lot of, the best clinicians give you also an ACE score. So you have a sense of what's your risk factor from that. It doesn't mean it's set in stone, but it's something to just sort of be aware of.
So you can change it, is your point. So, you can make that change and get, yes.
Yeah. So it's more modifiable than we thought. It's, ideally, it would be over a lifetime, but, it's like from the moment you hear this and you can kind of think about what are the things I can do to invite more kindness into my life in all these different areas, more love and kindness. And I think that's what's really exciting. I also talk about in the book, Dr. Elizabeth Blackburn's research and a lot of the work that's gone on at UCSF, which is also just extraordinary when we look at, that telomeres, which I'm sure some of your guests have heard of, the little bits at the end of our DNA. And they've been associated with lifespan. And it turns out that our lifestyle choices also impact our telomeres. And so I don't know if I'm explaining it clearly, but I try my best in the book to make it clear. Hopefully it was. But it's really just sort of we are at the beginning of understanding how our genes are responding to our social world. And what's exciting about this is, we may be at higher risk for, because of our family histories of certain things. But that might be a modifiable risk. Like maybe that illness starts later, or maybe we do better with it when it does start, or, and that's the idea. We're not going to be able to take all of it away, but at least we can sort of soften the blow through our social connections and our kindness in our different areas of our lives.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any research that shows, for example, let's see if I can articulate this well enough, but if you spend time on all the components that you talk about, the community, the love, the friendship, the things that sort of, I'm going to say, fill your bucket, fill your heart, that are not as quantifiable for when you go into the doctor's office. If you spend time on that, say earlier in life, before you get sick, versus spending time on it once you have a diagnosis that is whatever it may be, whether it's cholesterol or something more serious like cancer or heart disease. Is there a difference? Do you have any kind of research that shows sort of how much of that you need in order to get the return that you want on the wellness?
That's a great question and a hard one to answer, because I would say it reminds me of that quote, the best day to start was 10 years ago. The next best day is today.
Yeah.
So, it's like, in an ideal world, and we can sort of think prospectively about our children and loved ones, like, wouldn't it be great if, because kindness is everything from like our education, really impacts our health. Access to education, which as a physician, I never expected, but as the daughter of a teacher, I really appreciate. So things like that, it's like, yes, wouldn't it be great if every kid in the whole world, starting from the moment they arrived, had enough food, enough water, a safe place to sleep, people who love them, friends, something to fill their mind and their purpose with, a way to feel that they're contributing. Like that would be the ideal place to be. And I think we could actually probably nip a lot of these chronic illnesses in the bud if we could have more of a world like that. We're not there yet, but being mindful of that. And then I guess the other question is, once you have this knowledge, and that's actually why I wrote the book and why I, talk on podcasts and do other things, is because like this knowledge is life-changing. Like it feels like it just reframes what's important in your life and your world once you know that it's all about positive social connections, because it's not about like success in other ways. It's health is so much of this that it's important. One thing I do want to say that is there are really well done, fascinating studies on is looking, and I'll use the example of Alzheimer's disease. So people who have a high sense of life purpose. So, and there are scales to quantify this. If you even just Google like scale to figure out life purpose, people who have a high sense of life purpose have been shown to have, it's like in a stepwise fashion, like the more sense of a life purpose you have, whatever that purpose is, the longer you seem to live and fare better, even with illnesses. And so using the example of Alzheimer's disease, there have been prospective studies looking at this that show that people with a high sense of life purpose are less likely to get diagnosed with Alzheimer's, which is really interesting because we have so much of it going on right now. And then, and of course, some people have a higher genetic predisposition than others. And then the other thing that's been fascinating from these studies is that some people who have participated have amazingly donated their bodies to science. And after they pass away, when they look for markers of burden of disease, what they found is that people with high life purpose, even if they had a lot of evidence on their brain autopsy of disease, they actually functioned better in life and fared better if they had a high sense of life purpose. So, which to me, it's like even talking about it, I get goosebumps, right? Because it's like, it's amazing that you could, and this actually for me was like the mystery that I was trying to figure out, like, how is it that some people have, a really tough, challenging diagnosis or illness, and they somehow like make it to their kid's wedding, or they defy the odds and go on to, and it's not always, but it helps. Like it doesn't hurt. And it certainly helps when there's a sense of purpose, like to getting out of bed every morning, that like you matter, you make a difference. And that's something that we're finding. And this is something that I find so interesting and exciting, is that if we have a sense of purpose about our lives, like that just helps us live the lives that I think we all imagine. So that means you got to really pay attention to, are you feeling fulfilled in the things that you're doing? And I can't tell you what your sense of purpose is, but I think, everyone listening has a sense of what that purpose might be. And is there something you can do that's a tweak in your life to get a little bit closer to that? So those are some of the things that like the research is showing. And I wish I could like put a scale on it and a number, but right now it's like, we're figuring it all out still, but the evidence is enough to say like we can take action today. We don't have to wait for like the results of any study to come in just yet. Like definitely like being kind, tapping into our purpose, and still going to the doctor. Like those are all good things for our health and well-being.
Right. And life purpose, a lot of people throw that around and talk about it. I think there's an idea that it has to be this really big thing.
Oh, right.
But it doesn't, right?
Yeah.
I mean, everybody's life purpose can be so different.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I think is so fun about it. It's just like, it's whatever floats your boat and interests you. And nobody can predict that. And sometimes you can't predict that yourself, right? Like you just find like, oh, I'm really interested in X. And like, the thought would be like, how can you lean into that? So I'm trying to think, like, let's say, oh, I'm really interested in city development. Like, okay, like, so what could that look like? Maybe I could join walking clubs. Like maybe I could meet up with other people that are interested in city history. Maybe I could learn something from, like tapping into communities that are out there are ways to sort of, when you think about those ripples of health, like, to meet people, it turns out probably the best way to build our strength and relationship and our purpose is to connect with others in groups. So like, signing up for, actually volunteers live longer, like signing up for a volunteer project, like cleaning up a city, if that's your thing, whatever it is. I mean, I love it too, because it is like what a world we would live in if everyone was actually doing something that they loved, or at their jobs, they were able to find the things that they love. Like, they're the innovative companies that give people like a half day a week to dive into what they're interested in. And it turns out, it's also good for business. So.
Right. I think you said it before too, is what gets you up in the morning? What do you get excited about to get out of bed? And I think that's a really good marker to say, what am I excited about today? When you open your eyes in the morning, I can tell you, for me, sometimes I end up in a place I just should not. And I'm like, whoa, what are you thinking about? Like, think about the future and what you're excited about. And, you can't go fix something right now. You're just get excited about what it is. Like today, I woke up this morning and I was like, I'm really excited to talk to Dr. Kelli today. And what was it that I read that was so cool? And which passage did I screenshot to my husband? I probably should say that because I know I'll get someone that says, so which passage did you screenshot to your husband? I'm trying to think, oh, you know which passage it was? It was the one about touch. Not that I'm, was subliminally telling my husband, pet me more. No.
Yeah.
But really it was about the affection, about touch.
Yeah.
How important touch is. And I think I read the part about the baby that, they thought had passed and the mom put the baby on her chest and the baby started to breathe. And, we can chalk that up, as you say, to kind of a medical anomaly but it's true that touch just makes you feel good. It's so important. And yesterday, my son was leaving and he had a bad day the day before. I could tell he was kind of down, and I don't know, he's 23 and he's, strong, and I don't hug him as much as I used to. And I thought about that before he left. I said, hey, and he was kind of like, I'm fine. And I was like, well, I need a hug too. But it went to touch, and I thought, I need to hug more. But it was that passage. That's what I shared.
That makes me really happy to hear that. And I have to say, I have wholeheartedly, I did not come from a family that we were not big huggers, but after reading the data about hugging and how it can be health protective, and it's a little counterintuitive, right? That like actually hugging, getting close to someone is so health protective. So I have instituted in my house, like, it's my kids joke. It's almost like they call it medical hugs. Like, it's like we're going to hug and we're going to hold it a little longer than it's comfortable. So to really release that oxytocin. And of course, these are like, mutually agreeable hugs. That's an important part of it too,
right,
obviously.
Of course.
But it's really true. We're such social creatures, and obviously during the pandemic, we really learned how much we missed physical, not only social contact, but physical touch a lot of times. Like the little, even just shaking someone's hand became like this luxury, right?
Medically, can you go through what comes out of that hug?
Probably the biggest one is oxytocin, and that's the bonding hormone. But again, it's that same reduction in the stress response that causes that. Just even thinking about getting hugged, you kind of can feel it in your body, like feeling a little bit relaxed. That's the state that we're happiest in. And so if we can do more things to kind of get us into that state, whether it be exercise, talking with a friend, hugging someone we love, petting one of our animals. That's a really big one too. Those are all things that are beneficial that, often sort of escape our mind when we're thinking about health, but are really, really important.
Yeah. I just want to touch for a second on the blue zones. Obviously, it's come up a lot and people have been talking about it, and everyone wants to move to a blue zone or live like they live in a blue zone, and in particular, they focus a lot on Okinawa, which is the island off of Japan, where there's more people over the age of 100 than anywhere else. And then, of course, there have been studies that show we can't really even find their birth certificate. So we think they're over 100, but, so whatever, let's just throw that out there. But it's not just about a Mediterranean diet in those blue zones. It's not just about, gardening and things like that. What do you think about the blue zones?
Yeah, well, it's funny because it's true. And there has been some question about, well, maybe these aren't as blue as we thought. So, but that said, they're still really impressive. And there are lots of places around the world. And it's sort of like too much evidence in some ways to throw it all out. So that said, I think one of the things that had been missing from that data that they've now gotten into is this idea of social connection as part of that, right? So I talk about in the book Okinawa, which, has I've not made it there. I would really love to go, but my understanding from talking to people that have lived there is that there is a sense of, there are programs where people who are older take care of other older adults. And so, it's this, and it comes back to this purpose idea, right? Even when we are 100, we need to still have a sense of purpose and our reason to get out of bed in the morning. So maybe it's meeting somebody else or taking care of someone or being the light in someone else's life, whatever that is, what that is a part of it. So it's, as I mentioned, and I think I said this in the book, it's not just what you're eating, it's who are you eating with. I think a good example of that is actually with the Mediterranean diet. When you look and if you have any friends who are Italian or grew up in Italy, meals are not what we have in the US. It's like a lot of our meals in the US are solitary. We are this was very sad, but just the most recent World Happiness Report came out, and I was literally reading the data about how shared meals are so beneficial for health while I was sitting by myself eating a sandwich at my computer. It's that's how most of us are having our meals during our working weeks a lot of times.
Yeah.
So, so thinking about how can I make meals more of a social time? Maybe it's cooking with your kids. Maybe it's asking friends to bring over a dish and you have a shared potluck. Maybe it's just being a little bit more intentional and not thinking of it as a luxury to meet up with a friend for lunch, but actually part of your health package, once I've read this data, and especially with the most recent World Happiness data, it's like, so the optimum number of meals out of, they don't include breakfast. Out of like a 14 potential meals during the week, the optimum for health seemed to be around 13, health and well-being. I think the average American.
Wait, 13 meals you should share?
Yeah.
You should share 13 meals with
Funny
someone
enough,
else?
it's not 14, it's 13. But,
okay.
so I think,
wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. And I think the average American is probably around, if I remember correctly, it's around 5 or 6. Like it's much lower than the average. So, like for me, once I read that and knowing the data now, it's like, well, okay, like maybe instead of just like eating between running from event to event or picking one kid up and dropping another off, like I'll actually like be mindful about like, can I sit and meet a friend, or can I, maybe we sort of build in some time around that. So
I think girls' night out needs to be way more often than once a month.
Totally. Or like even like a retreat weekend, if you can swing it, like my goodness. Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. Or even.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Or brunch with friends. Like it turns out like it's not just a luxury. It's, it's also beneficial for our health.
Necessary.
Yeah.
Yes. Totally necessary.
Yeah.
Wow. No, that is an incredible statistic. 13. And I think it's a big deal that we do sit down in my house, at least for dinner every night. We share dinner every night. It's really funny. Though I'm come from an Armenian background, and we were all about food and eating, and we ate a lot, and it was a big part of our culture at home. I grew up in America, and so a drive-through between classes or at work was not unheard of. And then I met my husband, who's from Spain. And it's kind of funny that we would end up together. And he's very much that he likes to sit down for lunch and eat. And it's a thing. And when we met, I remember one time he said, hey, do you want to have lunch? And I was like, yeah, we were living in Miami, going to the University of Miami. And I said, I'm driving through, it was Pollo Tropical, not Pollo Loco. We have that out here. It was Pollo Tropical. And he said, and where will we bring it? And I was like, no, we eat it in the car. We're on our way someplace. And I can remember he was so like, where do I put it? And what, it's just so uncomfortable. Yeah. So we've sort of met halfway. But to your point, when you were talking about Italy, when we're in Spain, we spend a lot of time at the dinner table, and it is really fun and definitely fills your cup. Yeah. And it's not really even about the food. Yeah. It's not, some people will go, oh my gosh, I gained so much weight on vacation because all we did was eat, but I never feel that way. I feel very fulfilled, and we walk to dinner and we walk from dinner and we walk, and I don't know. I feel pretty good by the time we're done with a week of that. I don't feel as, I don't want to use the word bad, but I don't feel as unhealthy as one would think. Yeah. I think it's so much more about the socialization, as you have said, than it is really even about the food. Yeah,
absolutely. And I would even say you could take it a step back. It's also, I've noticed, from both the research and also from experiences with friends who grew up in these cultures, that a lot of times it's also the preparation of the food, right? Like it starts at the store, the market, where with so much love and care, the items are selected that will be cooked, that I feel like that is an art that had been lost to me and my very Americanized Western lifestyle. So, sort of thinking about that. And that sort of brings up like the idea of awe and gratitude, which we also know have these health benefits. So just sort of like how amazing is it that you can get this incredible tomato at your grocery store that's traveled this long way, and just sort of putting a little thought into that and who you get to share it with. And really, so Spain is poised to overtake Japan, I believe, as the longest living country in the years ahead. And some think it's because of the attention to the food, the siesta, which I understand is somewhat going away, but sort of a different take on what are the priorities in life and living.
Yeah, well, they really spend a lot of time socializing around food, which is great. Yeah. It makes me also wonder, and I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I do want to just ask you about sort of culturally where you think we are? And do you see it sort of rolling back? I feel like there was this big push for us to push forward, be as educated as we could, be as successful as we could, really lean into our careers. And over decades, many of us have moved away from family or community that we knew. And I see that, and I talk to friends about this, I see that as being detrimental to our health. And it sort of goes back to what I think you're saying about community and relationships and all that. I think that there's a Harvard professor that I did interview here. I thought his message was also just brilliant about taking the time in those communities, that those communities were built in at one time because we didn't move far away. Our parents grew up with the same people, our siblings grew up with the same people, and we sort of had that community built in and we took it for granted. Do you think that we are too much, we've turned too much into our careers and into our success and forgotten about that, and now there's a move to come back to it? What's your take on that?
A couple of thoughts come to mind. One is, so Robert Putnam is he did Bowling Alone, this idea that somehow we went from these sort of, just everyday life experiences of having clubs and people to meet up with, and, for a lot of people like organized religion and other things, to really being pretty isolated, going through the drive-through and having that as our day-to-day experience, sitting in front of our computer on our phone now. And so, there's all this data around loneliness and its prevalence. And I'm sure that's come up, and a loneliness is the subjective sense of being disconnected from other people. And sometimes you can even be like surrounded by coworkers or family and still not feel like you really connect or belong. So that's one piece of it. Then there's like literal social isolation, which is the number of people you see during the day. And the studies from different parts of the world that track this show that's going down, right? Like there are more people living alone. There are more people living away from family. Those aren't inherently, detrimental in themselves. But if you're not mindful that actually there's something about seeing people during the day that is beneficial for our health as well. So we know that both social isolation and loneliness are not great for health, and we need to sort of think about both of those pieces. As far as where we are and where we're going, I think there is, and I don't know if it's from the pandemic or just sort of changes in the world, I see it a lot in the kindness work as we're tapping into purpose and health and rethinking what is life all about. I think there's a thought that maybe success isn't everything. Success meaning like financial success or fame or all those things. It's like, it turns out probably what really matters at the end of our lives is the people we love and the people who love us. And it's as simple as that. And that's something that's within all of our reaches, right? So.
Okay. So if someone today that's listening wants to make a change right away, I always like to leave people with a thought of what they can do today. Let's give them a couple pieces to focus on, your top three, or you don't have to end there, but what are the 3 actionable items that you would like to leave people with?
Sure. Well, there's infinite, depending on what works for you in your life and what you're comfortable with. And I never recommend things that are not comfortable for people like, that are, I wanted to feel something that's like fun and enjoyable for you. But I would say probably the easiest thing that every single person could do is just, if a friend pops to mind that you have not, or family member that you've not spoken to for a while, maybe either pick up the phone, call them, text them, see if you can arrange a meeting. The other thing that's a really easy thing is gratitude. Like maybe think of someone that's helped you in your life and send them a little note to just say, I was thinking about you and just really appreciate all that you've done for me. I mean, I don't know if you've ever been on the receiving end of one of those notes, but my goodness, it makes you feel good to receive. The fun thing about kindness is it's the giver, the receiver, and any observer helps. And one thing I would say is if you are feeling a little bit lonely, like loneliness is just part of the human package, right? So that's good. Like recognize that feeling and emotion and then see what you can do to take some action. Maybe it means joining up and like finding a club you're interested in, learning something new. Signing up for a class is one of my favorite ways to both find community and get our brains fired up. I've started these Our Kind of Club kindness campfires. It came out of the book, but I've been doing it with 3 friends. We all come from different industries, and it's been delightful. We've had people from 18 countries. We gather virtually and we've done it now in London and New York and LA. But like this idea of like, we gather and tell stories of kindness, because that's actually been shown to boost your happiness level as much as like receiving some money. So why not? And so we tell stories, and it's amazing because it's like, for all the challenges that are in the world, there is so much good that's also happening. We just don't always hear about it. And sometimes they're just little things, but hearing those stories, sharing those stories, just remembering they're out there. So if you search Kelli Harding, MD, it'll come up, or Our Kind of Club or Kindness Campfire, it'll come up. And I highly recommend people join, say hi, say that you heard it on this podcast. I would love that. And that's just one thing. But yeah, just think about ways that you can infuse. And I loved one of your other guests mentioned just how can you uplift someone else's day a little bit? I know my day's been uplifted from our conversation. So thank you so much for taking the time and inviting me to join you today. I really appreciate it. I hope I didn't nerd out too much on the data. So I'm sorry if I
we love that.
long
we love
explanations.
that.
It's probably just because I'm so excited about some of this, and I wish I could like just tell everybody like really, really pay attention to your relationships.
Well, we wish you could just tell everybody too. So I'll have a link to the book in the show notes because you referred to it a lot, and actually it is really great. The studies, all the information, and then at the end of every chapter, I love how you have some actionable items of what people can do to start thinking about that. So I know you gave a couple right now, 3 of them, but if people want more, I would say pick up the book. And for sure, at the end of every chapter, there are some real actionable items there that you can start today. They weren't real difficult to just implement. So I love that. So we'll make sure we have that in the show notes. Dr. Kelli, thank you again. Thank you so much for your time. This is great.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you.